Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now, we are going to learn something more about innovation. First thing that we are going to do is about the stylized facts. What do you mean by stylized fact? The term stylized fact is essentially attributed to Nicholas Calder, who, in a very well-known paper presented in a conference on capital accumulation and economic growth, used the term. The idea there is that we have empirical observations. Is it possible to start with those empirical observations for the purpose of construction of economic theories? In fact, Calder pointed out that this kind of a stylized fact, they must be true in general, as it concentrate on broad tendencies, though ignore the individual details. That essentially implies that there is a possibility of differences in the case-to-case basis. However, the stylized fact that information, the empirics, the general pattern, the regularities which are about a specific field of research helps us in starting building of the theory as well as an important point of understanding the field. Stylized facts which I am talking about today are from Salter and Alexey in the Oxford Handbook of Innovation Management. To begin with, let us see the first one, whereby we talk about that innovation leads to productivity growth. What is productivity growth? Productivity growth, in a very simple term, means that the same input generates more output. Effectively talking about a technological change. If you remember, when we made a distinction between invention, innovation, and technological change, we did highlight that the change which we are talking about is essentially about shift in the production function, which was further elaborated upon and extended by the other economists. The beginning of this kind of a treatment comes from the seminal work of Solow in 1957, whereby he has estimated the contribution of technical change to the output growth. Using data from American economy, he has pointed out that more than 80% of the output growth is actually attributed to technological change. This technological change was also being referred to as a residual in the growth accounting approach, whereby you try and understand if there is a variation in an output over a period of a time and whether that variation is now attributed to change in capital or labor or whether it has been defined by something which is not understood. That the residual has been treated as a technical change in the work, essentially implying that if the capital, apart from the accumulation aspect of capital and labor, there are other forces acting which will lead to the increase in the output growth. And that has been studied under the technological change and attributed to the various innovative activities that undertake in a particular country or at an international level. Think from a point of view how an introduction of a computer would have changed maybe a banking sector or an education sector. And now, and with the prevalence of internet, what you find is that many people have access to the information, to the courses which they did not have. Clearly, it is going to increase the skill of those people who are now going to positively contribute towards the productivity growth in an economy. The earlier model, which treated this technological change as an external, something exogenous, which is outside the system, was later being studied through the endogenous growth model, whereby the idea was that are there factors which will be contributing towards this technological change? Can we identify them? And like we talked about in case of invention, innovation, and technological change discussion earlier, here also you will find that the models are either through the improvement in the quality of the product or through the process innovation or through the product innovation, whereby new varieties of product are now being introduced. Another important stylized fact about the innovation is that the innovation essentially involves combination of existing elements, bodies of knowledge, and technologies. I'll give you a very recent example of once again a smartphone. Here, what do you find? You find that a particular instrument which you are now able to use not only to communicate either through voicemail or through email, but has been also very helpful in sending your data, in providing you an access to the services which were earlier not available. Now, when you pick up this particular smartphone, you will find that it has curved side. Then you will find that there is another patent to that. If you swipe your finger across the screen to unlock it, that particular technology is also being supported and being covered under certain patent at the US level. If you will check your mail that pushed to the phone without the request to the server, there also you will find the technology has been once again protected. And or if you type a text message using only a few touches, as a phone automatically completes each word so that you don't even have to remember your spellings anymore. Clearly, that particular technology has also been protected. So what do we find is that a smartphone is essentially a combination of the different technologies, whereby an innovative mind has actually put them together to come up with a particular product which is of immense use to the human being. Now, when you think about in this case that if their invention, an individual invention is possible, or every time we are thinking of coming up with something new, will that means that their invention will actually end at one point of a time? In fact, this combinatory or this particular aspect of the innovation, whereby we are talking about the combination of the existing knowledge, bringing together the bodies of knowledge and technologies, in fact lend it to an infinite scope for the recombination. This infinite scope for recombination essentially points out that there might be no end to the innovative activities of the human being as long as we are able to put them in the new format, which is of some kind of an application or industrial use. This particular example of smartphone has been taken from Lewis, who has talked about the sky is not falling, navigating the smartphone patent thicket. In this, and again, when we are talking about something which is coming through because of combination, then what we will find? You will find that there is a need for people to come together also. Innovation involves collaborative effort. Many a times we have this mindset about a hero narrative. What is that hero narrative? Essentially, we think of a lone inventor, the lone inventor who creates and implements the innovation, which may or may not work. We may have an image of that particular person working in maybe a huge mansion. On the bottom of his mansion, there's a lab. It's a very difficult character to deal with, and also is very protective about the inventions he or she is being involved in. However, in the recent times, what we have seen that kind of a lone inventor, that hero narrative, is indeed no longer very much valid. What we have found is the collaboration is something which contribute towards the development of the innovation. In fact, if you go back to our example on the smartphone itself, you will realize that if there is no cross licensing amongst these technologies between the different companies, the product can actually not come into picture. Clearly, there will also be a need to bring in collaboration to bring these different technologies together and make sure that they work together. Hence, innovation does involve collaboration, and over a period of time, we have seen that such collaborations are indeed growing very much. If you look at a major projects, whether they are related to basic sciences or whether they are related to biotechnology, collaboration is the talk of the town nowadays. The another next stylized fact is about that the innovation is rather pervasive. We may think of that many a times that, when we're thinking about innovation and the new technologies coming up, it might be restricted to few sectors, maybe in IT nowadays or in, AI or electric vehicle. So there is likelihood to be a sectoral concentration of the innovation activity. But when we think of in terms of the impact that innovation might have, you will realize that in fact each and every sector of the economy is affected by that. In that context, there is something called a general purpose technologies, GPTs. These general purpose technologies clearly have impact on various sectors. Like I said earlier, think in terms of an ICT, the leap that human being has made in information and communication technologies. In those technologies, the work has not only changed in the IT sector, however, each and every sector of the economy, each and every section of the society has positively gained through the improvement in productivity. They have found new ways of doing things. As a result, you will find that the different sectors will be involved, engaged in the innovation activities. They might be either leading the innovation in terms of what is to be done, or they might be absorbing, adapting this kind of a general purpose technologies which are now being brought forward. Then what is it that, and why do we need to talk about low technology sectors? Sometimes we do talk about it. What we have seen is that at one particular phase, maybe there are certain sector in which the innovation activity is rather more immense and more intense, whereas the others may not have that kind of an activity going on. Based on that and the indicators related to R&D and patenting, some of these sectors have been termed as the low technology sectors. Maybe you can think in terms of wood processing sometimes, or even textile sometimes people point out. However, as new and newer materials will come into picture, maybe the textile sector itself will pick up. New and newer innovation which are more sustainable is also being talked about in the textile sector. So clearly, at some point or another point, relatively there is a potential possibility that the innovation activity in some sectors may be lower as compared to the other one. However, we cannot rule out the possibility that it will pick up at some point of a time, and also that it has already absorbed enough innovations from the general purpose technologies that are available. So in that sense, it could be a matter of time whereby you will find that a sector which is rather of a low technology suddenly picks up and in fact now respond to the maybe new technological or inventions that has come through different sectors and started responding to it. For instance, agriculture for a very long time was only about seed varieties or introduction of a better method of irrigation. However, with the improvements in AI and drone technology, so suddenly what can be done in agriculture has also changed. So clearly, the pervasiveness of innovation is something which is there in each sector, in each part of the, not only in each sector. The next is with respect to the countries also. One may think of that it's only the developed nations which are now experiencing or which are in fact engaging with the innovative technologies. That may not be the case. In the developing and the least developed countries, you may also find that the technologies, the innovations are going on. These innovations and technologies which are changing, they may not fall into the exact definition of the structured innovation, as we will talk about them later, but they might be something newer that has all been done. For instance, in Kenya, M-Pesa, when it has been the digital finance, once it has been introduced, it has revolutionized the country. Clearly, prevalence of inclusive grassroots level of innovation, which may not be in the formal structures of the R&D and patenting being done, are extremely prevalent in the developing and the least developed countries. Clearly, we will talk about the different types of innovations later, and we will also highlight where these type of innovations are rather being prevalent. The next fact is essentially about the changes brought through innovations are evolutionary, incremental adaptation of existing elements, products, and technologies. Now, if you look around and you think from a point of view of companies which are in the category of fast moving consumer goods, they are producing maybe soaps, they are producing shampoos or other household items which are to be used on a very daily basis. What kind of innovation activity they might be engaged into? It's not that you will see a different kind of soap every 20 years. However, that doesn't mean that these firms are not engaged in any kind of innovation activity. They are not doing any R&D. They might be introducing new scents, they might be introducing new colors, they might be introducing new chemicals which are no longer that harmful to the environment. So the innovation in that sense might be evolutionary. They will build on what is being existing. There might be incremental adaptation of the existing element. So they will be adding on to the whatever is already existing, either the product or the technology. Once the smartphone as a major technology has come into picture, what do you see now? The newer and newer inventions are in fact in the form of introducing new apps which can ease the life of various people. In fact, the introduction of these new apps now cannot be put together as a extremely radical change. This is rather an incremental change that has been brought into picture. Now, one has to also understand that why would firm would be engaging in incremental innovation. Please note that the firms would like to continue their product line for a very simple reason, that the investment they had made in advertisement, in establishing the brand over a period of a time, the organization setup has been created around that particular product line. It is very hard and difficult to introduce changes in the way the firms function, and as a result, they would rather want to continue with the products that they have and keep on adding more and more features and attributes to that. Moreover, there is always this fear, the fear that the new product which we may introduce will in fact cannibalize into the market of the existing product. If that is the fear which companies are having, clearly the focus will once again become incremental. There is immense literature which points out, in fact, this is the fear which has actually led to the downfall of the various large companies also. There is an example of an IBM which has actually developed a phone around in 1992 and called it Simon, if I'm not wrong, and but could not see its application. And one can see that how the things have changed once you have that kind of a smartphone introduced in 2007. So clearly, most of the focus, and I would say the resources that has been devoted, are towards the evolutionary and incremental adaptation of the existing elements. Why is so? Because what you will find is that the radical and the revolutionary changes are rather rare and many times are largely unknowable also. For example, that IBM case I told you about, the smartphone, they could not visualize, they could not envision how this kind of a product will actually act in the market. And then on the other hand, this kind of a radical and revolutionary changes, they do happen. They do happen. However, these instances are rather rare, and once they happen, they are clearly likely to change the entire way of the things are being done. So when we talk about innovation, clearly keep in mind that we are talking about what kind of a change we are talking about. One has to be very clear whether we are talking about incremental change or the radical or the revolutionary change in the way the things are being done. Now let's talk about the next stylized fact, which highlights that the most innovators indeed fail to capture returns from their innovative efforts, because capturing returns from the innovation requires different skill set for that is from the creation of the innovation. This particular point largely works on a very influential paper by Tees, whereby he highlights that how companies can in fact appropriate their intellectual property. Now the work has pointed out that whether the firm is being able to create an intellectual property, that is one set of an activity. Now this intellectual property or an innovation creation part of it can also be done by certain individuals. However, whether they have the capability to actually earn returns from this intellectual property is a matter of a concern. And many a time what we will find is that not everyone has that kind of a capability. At an individual level, the one has to understand that any kind of a coming up with an invention is one set, whereas mass production, marketing it, distribution of it would require a very different kind of a skill set. Now, if that is the case, then clearly how do you go about it? If we will talk about one example, let us look at this example of a water bottle. Now, in the water bottle, we are already having a kind of a bottle whereby you will see that at the top of it, it will give you the temperature of the water which is within that. Now, imagine you have a bottle which can actually sense the temperature around you. It can sense the temperature of the particular room. It can compute that and accordingly either warm or cool the water as per the temperature. So, essentially, this is a different product which you have now come up with. And maybe an individual inventor who has been now very interested in, let us say, sensor technology and has come up with this particular idea and has also been able to make a prototype out of it. But once you have been able to come up with that product, you will realize the market for the water bottle is indeed an extremely competitive market. Not only that, there are certain very large players which exist in that market. In fact, you will find that many small players are there in the market which caters to the lower end of the market. then the question will be, how do I appropriate now my intellectual property? How do I essentially make money from this creative activity that I have been able to do? In that context, Tees has pointed out that whether a firm is able to do that, whether they are able to appropriate their IP, will depend upon the ability of the firms to gain from the knowledge, how far they will be able to make profit out of it. It will also depend upon the nature of the knowledge in the industry. Now, if we are talking about an industry whereby the knowledge is changing immensely at a very fast pace, clearly the firm has to now figure out the means, the different methods through which they can do that. And now compare it with an industry which has very high barriers to entry, and also there are very few players, and in those kind of an industry, clearly the firm will have a very different strategy with respect to how to appropriate their intellectual property. So firm has to understand its own ability. They have to understand what has been going on in the particular industry, what kind of a technological opportunities it is being presented. Is it extremely competitive? Is it that if you come up with a certain product today and you will find that your competitor can actually make a better one within the next few days? If that is the nature, then how would you appropriate? Then one has to align this information about its own ability and nature of the knowledge with the appropriability regime of the industry in that case. Like I said, if imitation is much more easy in that particular industry as compared to innovation, one may have to now go for patenting. On the other hand, if you find that imitation is rather costly and it is very difficult for the competitors to come up with a newer product very fast, then we will find and use the different other means of the appropriation. We will talk about what do you mean by intellectual property. We will also talk about in one of the module about how these intellectual property rights can help the firms in fact gaining over the competitors. So essentially, it is not an easy, it's not everybody's cup of tea to be able to appropriate their own intellectual property. The appropriation itself requires a different skill set. You have to be well aware of how you're going to do about it. You have to be well aware about the competitors. One also has to be very well aware that what is the appropriability regime. And lastly, most importantly also, what kind of complementary assets that are available. Like I gave you an example of a water bottle, which you have maybe come up with. And now once you look at that water bottle, the idea would be that if now I want to mass produce this particular bottle, what is it that I need? You would need a factory, clearly, and that means you have to set up a plant. You would have to have an access to the raw material. You would have to hire labor. You have to set up the machinery, and also later, having done the production, you would have to now engage in the distribution. You would have to reach to the various retailers, wholesale sellers to kind of sell your product. Not only that, you would also have to conduct some amount of marketing of your product. When you realize that, as I said earlier, it's a highly competitive market, not only with the presence of the large players, but also many small players which are present in the industry, then why not simply get a patent on this particular bottle and license the patent technology to a large player and be able to gain from that. Now, in that context, this capacity to license and then to gain from your own creativity through the licensing activity will essentially be dependent on whether there is a good market for technology in that. Essentially, it means that whether you will be able to find a partner. If you are able to find a partner, will you be able to get into a contractual agreement with them, which is as per the benefit of yours? And not only that, in case of any kind of a dispute, whether you will be able to defend your intellectual property at a much faster pace. So clearly, having it to do a creative activity is one. On the other hand, to gain from it would definitely require much more effort, and also many a times will depend upon the circumstances that are being faced in the industry and in the particular country also, I would say. The next fact is about that in terms of innovation, what we will find, there are a vast array of different types of innovation that are available. Here we will see when we will talk about the types of innovation that we start with product, process, technological, non-technological, including organizational and marketing. Having done this much, we will see that the In the developing country, in the least developed countries, there's a lot more talk about grassroots innovation, frugal innovation, inclusive innovation. And nowadays, given the major crisis with respect to the climate change that the humanity is facing, you also find that green innovation and sustainable innovation is also of a paramount importance. Now, this vast array of the different types of innovation essentially not only come from what are the motivations for which somebody is innovating, but also depending upon the kind of resources that you are engaging with in terms of innovating that particular product or the process. Economic literature has also talked about the regular patterns in innovation activity. In fact, different types of models has been devised and has been devoted to understand this kind of a patterns in innovation. To begin with, the very influential one is about the product life cycle that has been given by Abernathy and Utterback as early as in 1978. That particular product life cycle hypothesis essentially talk about three different stages in the introduction of the new product in the market. The first stage, which they are essentially talks about, is a fluid stage. Here, the product itself is something which is under consideration. It has not evolved to a particular level whereby it will be accepted by the consumer as such. The producer or the innovator or the inventor is essentially now struggling with the basic features itself. They might be adding one, they might be removing something, and you can think in terms of maybe the way initially a desktop would have been come into picture. One idea was always to put together the different components of it and can come up with this particular idea of a desktop that is now available in almost every household and in every office. Then which feature to add to it, which feature to remain, which feature to kind of improvise on. If you are in that particular stage, that stage is essentially a fluid stage. This fluid stage essentially focuses on the product itself. Not only that it focuses on the product itself, it also focuses on the constant feedback that happens between the consumer as well as the producer or the inventor at that particular stage. Once you have moved away from the fluid stage, the focus then moves to a transition phase. The focus is still, once again, is the product. However, it is essentially about adding more variants of it, or maybe, introducing different types of the particular product. That is the transitional stage which is being referred, and the focus is on the variant of the product that has now been come into picture. The last stage is essentially the specific stage. Here, now the focus is on the process. The producer has, after having standardized the way a particular product looks, has also introduced different variants of that standardized product. Now, in order to mass produce it, in order to ensure that you are able to make profit from that particular product, what you do is effectively focus on standardizing the process to produce it. If you have to standardize the process to produce it, once again, we are looking at a more and more process innovation or trying to do it in such a way that it becomes very cheap to mass produce the particular product. Because the competition in that case with the other competitors will now be going to be with respect to the prices. So this way, what you find in the product life cycle, there are different stages that has been talked about of the innovation activity. The focus initially being the product itself, ensuring that it is now to a standardized level, then at a later stage to introduce different variants of that particular product, and towards the end, the focus being the process innovation or the need to make a standardized process through which the product can now be mass produced such that the cost of production comes down immensely. Another stylized fact is towards the strong complementarities between the different types of innovation also exist. If you look at any product that nowadays, for instance, we talked about that smartphone, whereby you have this battery, it has certain life strength, you have the screen. So clearly, these are not the inventions which will or innovations which will belong to one particular field. They have to come together, and the boundaries, the so-called watertight compartments which used to exist between the different, let us say, branches of engineering or with respect to sciences are indeed getting now more and more blurred, because the final product that we are looking at is indeed something which complement the different types of innovation. The last stylized fact is indeed about the activity being sticky. Sometime back we talked about the pervasiveness of innovation, then how do we align that particular stylized fact with the sticky activity? Please note, when we talked about the pervasiveness of the innovation, we essentially highlighted the presence of innovation, the newness and the new ideas which are being created and are used in the different sectors or in the different countries across. Here, what we are talking about, the devotion of the resources, whether in terms of human or the financial resources that are being now attributed to research and development. In case of developing and least developing economies, you may find that though the resources which are devoted in a very structured and you can say in a very formal uh, sense of the world towards research and development and innovation may not actually fall into this category. However, that doesn't mean that the informal sectors, the grassroots innovations does not exist. Here, if you look at the so-called aspect of the stickiness of the activity, effectively in terms of the investment that is made in the research and development, the human resource or the potential that has been human personnel that has been devoted towards the research and development activity is indeed very, very sticky. You find that there are top few countries, including USA, China, and Korea, and maybe Japan, Australia, Belgium, etc., who are now being devoting a lot of expenditure towards research and development. This graph from OECD highlights this particular point. As you can see, the bubble of China and Japan being very, very large. In fact, the same data, what we find is that 77% of the expenditure is indeed on the research and development being incurred by the top 5 countries. In not only that, only top 2 countries, that is US and China, contribute towards more than 55% of the research and development expenditure. So what you find is a situation whereby a lot of resources are being devoted by few countries towards the research and development. Clearly, whether the country is able to spend that much on research and development will be dependent on various factors. The studies have shown it will depend upon, first of all, availability of the resources and availability of the human capital itself, and then also the engagement with the research and development activity. The current situation, which is also there for quite some time, highlight the concentration of the research and development activity in few countries as such. In sum, what we can say that the innovation process, the activities are indeed uncertain, they are cumulative and collective. The outcome of these activities is not known. Hence, it becomes important from the firm point of view to assess whether to undertake that activity by undertaking what we call as a calculated risk, depending upon the uncertainty of the outcome of any kind of a research and development project. They also have to see that the activity is indeed cumulative. It builds on what has already exist in the literature. It builds on what has already been done by the researchers in this particular field. And in the now and clearly in the current situation, the activity has to be collective, bringing in innovators, inventors from the different fields together to come up with a project or a product or a process which will be now novel in it all sense.